Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kobe Hunt, the Solutions Engineering Lead and Deputy Chief Technologist at Distology, the Channel Cyber Solutions Specialist and Distributor. So welcome to this edition of Delve Live. Delve is a podcast by Distology, where we're joined by a panel of guests to tackle different technology topics that need unpacking, exploring, and often demystifying. So today's panel has been named OT, Rise of the Machines, which is in no way related to Terminator 3, Rise of the Machine. So there's going to be no Arnold Schwarzenegger impressions today, maybe later at CRN. We'll see how that pans out. What we're going to be delving into is all things operational technology, or we'll keep referring it to as OT. We'll be discussing the risks associated to these environments, as well as the new convergence between OT and IT, and then ultimately the new opportunity that this is going to present to the IT channel. So set the scene a little bit for people who don't know. Operational technology is the backbone to all our critical infrastructure, or critical and national infrastructure. It spans across verticals such as oil and gas, energy, transportation. That's just to name a few. But to set the scene a little bit, let me go back. The priorities between OT and IT are completely different. When it comes to OT, availability and safety are absolutely paramount. Because if you think about a cyber attack when it comes to an OT environment, the consequences can be absolutely detrimental. I've been working in IT now for just over 12 years, believe it or not, and I'll be the first to say that operational technology is still fairly new to me. But who it isn't new to is my lovely panel of guests, so allow me to introduce them. First, we've got Chris Byrie from Garland Technology. He is the CEO and co-founder. He's got way over 30 years experience in the OT and network tap space. We've got experienced channel leader and all-around great guy from Global Vice President of Partnerships, Jake Alasko. We've got the legend himself, Ian McGowan, CEO and co-founder of Barrier Networks. And then we've got Harjit Hofi, the Senior Solutions Engineer at OpSWAT. And OpSWAT are one of our latest vendors to join the OT portfolio. Now, I'm going to kick things off straight away with Chris. So, Chris, welcome. You're the co-founder of Barrier Networks, where you design, manufacture, and implement green boxes. Not any green boxes, of course. They are referred to as network taps, and they are important for a visibility around all network visibility and OT visibility. For our audience, can you explain what your tech does and how it benefits customer scenarios?
Yeah, absolutely. And definitely thanks everybody for coming today. Really appreciate it. I know we're all busy, so it's great that you're taking some time out. And OT is absolutely, it's an environment that, as you mentioned, in IT, you can lose a lot of money. In OT, we can lose lives. So I always like to start with some of the basics. And I like to say that the truth is in the packets. Again, the truth is in the packets. So what does that mean? So for Garland Technology, what we look at is how can we instrument networks to effectively get packet level data from the network and be able to send this to your security and monitoring tools. So these environments are challenging, right? So if you're looking at substations, you're looking at transport, you're looking at maritime, manufacturing, these aren't your nice and clean data centers, right? Everybody has, if you go to an IT organization, a lot of times they'll have a Visio, they'll have a network drawing, and they know where everything is, everything's labeled. So when you get into OT, you find that it can be very difficult and challenging of figuring out ways to deploy and connect up your security and monitoring tools. So what we look at is providing hardware. So yes, hardware. There's still a lot of opportunity in hardware. So I know everybody loves the SaaS model, and it is great. But in these environments, a lot of times these are closed environments, right? Air-gapped in a lot of cases, or you have to look at doing segmentation. So where we fit in, one of our most basic products is what we call a wiretap. So we're having a conversation today, and if a wiretap's placed in front of us, the wiretap's actually going to copy everything we say. So we do this in a secure manner. So we actually don't change. So if we're looking to protect an asset, between a PLC and a switch, we can actually insert a wiretap and copy all the packets from there to security and monitoring tools. So the idea is how do you find the traffic that you need to be able to effectively install and deploy your security tool. So there's products like Radiflow, Nozomi, Clarity, Dragos, to name a few. And in order for them to do their job effectively, they have to get the traffic. And again, there's a lot of challenging environments where maybe you're running into 100 base FX, you're running into 100 base, older technologies, remote sites, and a lot of times it's very small data. So you may have a substation as an example that, maybe you have 30 megs of traffic. So are you going to put, sensors at every single substation? So
yeah, I think the key point there is all about visibility, and you can't protect what you don't know is there. And I think the next person I'm going to speak to is obviously Harjit, and I think you appreciate the importance of network visibility. But we've now got this thing called Industry 4.0, which is ultimately the awakening of operational technology. And some of these industries are now starting to use more next-gen technology, such as cloud, sometimes AI and augmented reality. But for this to work properly, more traffic must leave the OT network and more traffic must enter the OT network, which is, in the past, completely off-grid. So, Harjit, how do customers tackle this scenario?
Yeah, I think I would say, based on the segmentation point you raised, customers are really splitting the network or segmenting it based on assets and data flows. So I would say most customers are using reference architecture, so that's splitting that network into various zones and looking at those data flows. So as you said, generally it's IT to OT. That can be split relatively easy, I would say, in a one-way fashion where you can silo those flows. Data coming from IT back into OT, again, that might need to be sanitized and checked. And then, as you mentioned, that's the Industry 4, then taking data from OT and actually send it to the cloud. So I would say some of the technology we see in the government and defense space is a prime candidate to be used in this area. So this is things like when you have offline environments, you've got air gaps, so you can get this data out. The benefit of using these types of technologies is you're actually replicating the data. So what that means is the data you've got in OT, you're actually sending a copy to an IT, but you're actually closing the back door effectively, you're protecting that asset. And the same analogy applies to the cloud, where I can get the data out, but there's no way anything from the cloud or outside can come back in. So I would say with regulation, certainly been driven by people like NCSC, this sort of government defence analogy, it's really coming into play on the OT side.
So we're really now starting to talk about that convergence of IT and OT systems, but also teams. And Jake, if I move to you next, I think Cyolo really is one of them technologies that begins that convergence, because Cyolo applies identity-based principles to remote access principles. And what it allows customers to do is allow a remote workforce to connect to critical infrastructure. So Jake, my question is, how important has this been to some of your customers?
Yeah, it's massive, right? I mean, I think, well, first of all, Ash, thanks for having me. I think, first of all, it's just going to set the stage on the market. It's not small, and I think a lot of people look at OT and go, oh, it's this niche market. It's massive. It is, you think about it this way, 19 out of the top 20 global organizations are all OT-based, 285 out of the global 500 all OT-based, right? So huge market. And what we've kind of learned really quickly is getting people connected into those environments, whether it's third party, whether it's device, is incredibly important for the way that these jobs are done. And I'll give you a quick story. I met with a prospect a while back, and he was out of Saudi Arabia. And I said, what is it like working with those oil rigs or, whatever the plants you guys have out there? He goes, if something clicks off, it takes me 8 hours to drive out there, press a button, and 8 hours to drive back. I was like, that's not a great Saturday, right? Like, that's really bad. So, I think given the ability for us to connect people to those devices, connect people into environments, allows for better safety, faster access, and overall better information sharing, right? And I think as you look at if you look at the difference between IT wants all the information. OT doesn't want to give up any of that information, right? So if we're able to kind of come in the middle of that conversation now and join those two guys together with what they actually need, it makes it a really easy talk track for them to now all of a sudden be able to go, okay, we see the security value in this.
Cool, thank you. So, Ian, you've had quite an interesting career. We spoke last week. You've done it all from repairing tanks in the British Army all the way to advising Quantico or governments at Quantico. And you've also spent the last 17 years leading and guiding barrier networks into the OT space. How reliant are critical infrastructure customers on vendors and partners as well?
Very reliant. I would say the kind of OT industry, or the customer base that's in the OT industry, is quite immature when it comes to their security knowledge and how they are implementing the controls that they need to implement. As a service provider, it's really our responsibility to work with our customers and to help them mature their OT so that it comes up to at least the level of their IT. They're facing different risks, as we've kind of alluded to so far. If we look at the cyber industry and kind of rewind 20 years, we've evolved a lot in the past 20 years. The OT industry is probably right back at that kind of early stage of cyber, if we think back to then, where we're trying to take the lessons that we've learned from cyber and in general IT cyber and move it into OT. So typically we start with kind of assessments to find where they are on the maturity curve. But the kind of people and process aspect only takes you so far. We have to rely on technology. So it's definitely a blended approach in the supply chain for service providers like us, where we have to rely on technology vendors in order to get the right levels of security.
Cool, thank you. So, Jake, I'm going to change directions a little bit here and mix it up. So you've got quite a vast amount of experience in the cyber industry at various different vendors. But about 10 months ago, you moved over to Cyolo, which is an OT vendor. What was that experience like? And I imagine the personalities you meet and the languages being used is very, very different. What's that been like?
It was like starting from scratch. The first show I was at is a show in Orlando called ARC, and it is a very OT-centric, right, practitioner-based show. And the first person that I approached just happened to be a very well-known CTO at a very well-known OT vendor. And I threw up all over myself, right? It was really bad. I said something, zero trust. And she just laughed at me and said, "This is like your first week in OT." And I basically said, "Yes, it is." But she was a little bit more forgiving. What I did find, though, is as I've been to shows over the time, people want to generally teach you what they do. They want to talk to you about their organization. They want to give you information. So, as I go to cyber shows, right, and talk IT, you get that 30-second window to get people really interested and engaged. At the OT shows, you're spending 20 minutes at a booth with prospects, and they're really digging into your technology. They really want to know areas where they can improve. They want to learn. And I just have found overall it to be a very welcoming kind of group and structure.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, one comment on that is too, I see that a lot of the, you have a lot of engineers who get the IT security cap added to them. So, a lot of times you'll find that, you're dealing with, someone that's, running the machinery and, they were the one who liked to do some work on the computer. So they're like, okay, you're IT security. So, you're finding that, there'll be a lot of individuals who are actually, very interested in learning and collaborating and seeing, what's available out there.
Where does that conversation typically start then? So industries and organizations say, right, you need to do better at OT cybersecurity. Is that driven by the OT teams or is it driven by the IT teams? And do you ever find the two types almost butting heads with each other?
Yeah, no, I definitely see it. And, I was speaking with one of our partners. I was at GITEX in Dubai. And one of the things that they stated as a reseller, they said, we purposely only talk with the OT folks. We don't actually want to talk to the IT because they're sometimes, they don't really want to work together. Like, this is my information. I've been running this. So, a lot of times we find that you really want to, focus on the, OT engineers and, really work with them and build up their trust.
one of our recent customers, we got a direct quote from. CLO is the first technology that both IT and OT agree upon, right? So yes, I think it happens pretty often.
Yeah, Silo is one of them vendors where it doesn't just have to work in OT. There's obviously an IT spin as well, and that's the same for OpSwap. Ian, you started this journey with Barrier probably about 17 years ago of moving from IT to OT. I'd imagine that wasn't an easy journey, and I imagine there was a lot of learning to do down the way. So can you just explain what that journey was like, and maybe any advice to the audience who are thinking about starting that journey as well?
Yeah, so we still are an IT cyber company predominantly, who just happen to focus in OT as well. The kind of stakeholder engagement that you mentioned is very pertinent. It's one of the biggest challenges that we have. We speak to IT and then we speak to OT, and the two of them really don't want to collaborate because OT think that, we'll knock out their systems or they'll hit their production, and IT they think that the OT stakeholders don't understand security. So for us, it's been a bit of a kind of learning curve as well, because we've been on that journey. We also focused on DevSecOps, and we had that same challenge with developers and operations. So we're kind of like social workers in some of our jobs, where we're trying to bring two parties that need to work together in order to collaborate and get the right outcome. So for us, it's really about building close working relationships, both with the customer who needs us, they know they need us, but they just might not know what to do next. And then also working with the industry vendors out there who have a huge amount of expertise. So for us, it's really been taking the same journey that we took in IT cyber, relating it to OT cyber, and then just making sure that we don't overreach in the OT space, because you can have pretty devastating impact, in the health and safety aspect of things. So really just a maturity curve, working close with the customers, developing our own practice, especially in the health and safety side of things, working with other companies. So we tend to have to collaborate, not just with vendors, but with other cyber companies, and especially health and safety companies. But yeah, it's all about collaboration, really. I couldn't emphasize that more.
And it's sometimes the things you don't think about as well. So we start talking about partnerships in services. It's sometimes things like health and safety as well. That needs to be thought about, because it's not just the technology we're thinking about, it's the people in the plant, because if this all goes wrong, it's them that ultimately could get hurt. So we need to start thinking about the different partners we have within our network as well. So the next question is really to the entire panel. There's going to be a lot of IT channel partners in the room, in fact, who are serving customers in verticals that fall under NIS2, the NIS2 directive. So a lot of OT landscape is now going to land on their plate ultimately. Does that mean there's going to be more inter-channel relationships and inter-channel partnerships between IT and OT service providers?
Well, I think so anyway. I think collaboration is key. We're keen to open up and partner with anyone. There's a huge customer base out there, I would say, that needs serviced, and the only way you can do that, if you don't have the expertise initially, is to partner and then learn how to do it.
Yeah, I'd say going back to NIS2 for CI, it's very much mandated that they've got to adhere. If you look in the UK and what the regulator's saying here, obviously there's a short window, and clients seem to be doing something, so the regulators want to see progress. So yeah, I would say it's a framework that any partners that become familiar with it, I think it's a very good business model.
I was just to say, on the partner side, you're trusted in a lot of the organizations on their carpeted side today, right? Just now it means segueing over into an area where there's a ton of growth potential, both from a services as well from a product standpoint. It's legitimately the Wild West. I mean, it is wide open in what you can potentially do in those engagements, right? So it's a little bit is about learning and then about gaining the trust on the OT side to start to win that business over.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of opportunity here. So, one of the great things that Distology is doing is the fact that they're bringing together multiple OT vendors. So, I look at it as this is, huge greenfield. And, if you have the relationships with those customers, in my mind, this is a no-brainer to, bring in vendors that are on the panel here and looking at, we're here to, help educate, help work with the reseller community, help you bridge those gaps to get comfortable because I've read some reports where actual deployed security within OT could be as little as like 3%, 5%. I mean, it's the opportunity is tremendous, and I look at it as think about what the OT customers are doing, right? So if they're running Windows 95 still, these are loyal long-term customers. So this is something that you get in the door, you start building that trust. You're going to have a very long-term relationship, which is also going to be obviously some really good revenue for everybody, for services, for product sales, and it really is a phenomenal opportunity.
Yeah, so it's probably fair to say that a lot of you here are probably already servicing customers in this field, but maybe more on the OT side of things. So any advice to the people in the room that how do I start that conversation with the OT teams? Because you can't go in all guns blazing, pretend you know everything. You have to be a bit open and honest. So how do you start that conversation?
Kobe, I think a good place to start is actually trying to understand that customer's environment. So that could be as simple as how are they segmenting the network, the type of applications they're running. It could be, do they have lots of substations? It's getting that that closeness to the environment. That will help you tailor your conversation with the OT teams. I think once you get the buy-in from OT, then it's much easier to go to IT, your traditional probably customer. But yeah, I think it's that familiarity, probably getting used to some of the language. There's a lot of reference architectures out there, which most customers are aligning to. So getting familiarity with that would really help. I think those are the obvious ones to start with.
Yeah, also what's driving change is important. So government policy and kind of regulatory standards that are now being pushed. We're seeing maritime now focus, for example, on security. So for us, we look at where the standards are being pushed by industry and also where government are pushing it into critical national infrastructure. And in all honesty, that's where we focus our attention, because those are the ones that will be assigning budget and usually are more concerned with, solving their cyber risk.
Use the word safety a lot. They love that. That paired with, I think, ask a lot of questions, right? Like as I've gone through this journey over the course of the year, I'm asking questions. I'm asking questions of prospects. I'm asking questions of our vendor community, right? So I think the nice thing about OT is it's massively incestuous, right? And that every vendor is connected in some way or somehow. And they're willing to teach you. They're willing to get out of the way and just kind of help you get some guidance. So ask away, I think, is probably the best way I'd say.
Yeah, I always like to go back to when I started in IT in '93. I call myself a whiteboard engineer. So start with a blank board always, right? And that's with IT, OT. You really want to learn and understand what your customers are doing and learn their network and learn their environment is always a great way to start.
Yeah, and going back to Jake's point, I have found it really helpful from the vendors and our partners as well. Because like I said, I don't come from an OT background at all. I've been 12 years in IT, and the guys have been more than willing to just help me out and understand the language being used. OpsWatt, I've got a tremendous OpsWatt Academy where it opens up for all the different learning modules. It gives you an introduction to CI, which is critical infrastructure. And if you become a partner, your teams will get access to that. So it's a really good place to start learning. And personally, I found it really helpful from just going to events and conferences just like this to understand the language being used and the problems that these environments are being faced. I guess this would be the last question. So is there any pitfalls that partners should try and avoid when they start to think about that transition from IT to OT and that journey?
For me, I would say patience. So, I mentioned that, there's a long haul relationship here that can be very profitable and exciting. But in terms of change, right, it can take time for these environments. So I guess, one word of advice on the reseller side, and I had a reseller company in the 90s, and, you have to be a little patient here. Customers will take time to make decisions. They're not going to just throw something in a network quickly and just test it out. So, I would say that you want to make sure that you're patient and looking at the long run here, because again, the opportunity is there, and there's a lot of they need help. but they're going to be very, process driven. And so that's just something that, I always like to say on the reseller side is, look at the long term here in the OT, because it's going to be a great ride, and we're just beginning.
I think probably just would say don't lead with IT solutions or IT mentality as you're out having engagement. Again, go back to asking a lot of questions and start to think about maybe some of the OT type folks that you've engaged with in the past, right? So think about those vendors first.
So there's been some quite interesting talking points here, and at this point I'd really like to open up the floor to our audience. So is there any questions that you guys might have for our panel? We've got one right at the back, which isn't going to help because we've not got a fifth microphone, so you're going to have to take one and pass it on, I think.
This is just and thanks everyone, that was really, really useful. Just a two-part question. Firstly, in terms of, I recently got LinkedIn Premium, so I've been doing a look at different positions in different companies, and I've noticed a lot more OT positions have opened up. In terms of some of our partners' engagement, who are the best people to currently engage to start bridging that conversation? And then just a second part to that question, historically, who's been responsible for breaches? If it's never been on the IT side, it's now opening up to the OT side. When it comes to breaches happening, who's had that ultimate responsibility? And I'm not going to swear, but they're in the problem.
I can have a bash, yeah. So historically, I think the chief exec or the MD, kind of carries the can. The lines have been blurred because they've not really understood the cyber requirement or the impact of kind of cyber physical risk, if you like. Your first point, about those kind of what those job titles are, if you like, is a problem that we have when we're prospecting, because if we're prospecting for IT cyber, we're looking for CISOs, security managers, security directors. In the OT side, they have all wild and wacky job titles, like asset managers and just things that we would never, have imagined. So you really have to look at the organization and then work down and then try and figure out if that prospect is responsible for kind of OT or OT cyber. But that is a challenge that we face now.
A current prospect who there are 2 security folks for 300 plants, right? And it's pretty common. So it becomes everybody's problem at some point, right? But I think as you're focusing, and Ian said it best, but they definitely have wacky titles. There usually is some kind of security OT manager or plant manager or something along those lines that you probably focus on.
Yeah, and definitely you want to just dig down to not so much the title, but who's handling the security piece, because the titles can definitely be very difficult.
I suppose most organisations do have some sort of, at least an OT security manager. How big the team is really dependent on the maturity of the organisations. I would say traditionally, probably the sort of SCADA, the engineers that run the plant, some of them have gone into, the security discipline. So a lot of the teams are being built that way. So that's sometimes a good place to start as well.
Just kind of a question about kind of approaching the right person. Obviously, a lot of kind of historical IT managers now have to put this OT hat on to kind of get conversations going, not just with them, but also kind of encouraging partners to have those conversations. Is there anything within the realms of traditional IT cybersecurity that you can kind of talk about first, to kind of help bridge that gap to OT?
Maybe to start on. I would say actually bringing data from IT into OT is a good place to start, because obviously IT is responsible for that, and ultimately it's going to the OT people. So that's a good way to bridge or start the conversation. Things like Digital 4 is actually standardizing some of the protocols, applications being used. So these are more IT protocols being used. It's not the historical stuff that was used in OT. So I think those trends will probably help.
Yeah, just taking it back to risk, trying to find out what they're worried about, but also what their kind of regulatory or policy drivers are, and then trying to work from those back. That's you usually find that for us, that the organisations who are proactive with their OT security are already looking to try and address it, because there is some kind of regulatory challenge either there now or on its way. But we find them to be quite immature in their kind of security posture. We also, although we lead with an OT type conversation, We do use OT technology within IT and IT and OT. So OpsWat, for example, are one of our biggest vendors in terms of how much of it we sell. So partner with them. But we do a lot of OpsWat and OT, especially in kind of nuclear, central government and defence. But we also do OpsWat within normal IT, like finance, for example. So using what you've learned in IT will absolutely carry over into OT, but just being cognizant of the different risks that they're encountering.
You nailed something there. And I think what we've seen over the course of the last year is really a huge movement of IT practitioners trying to get into OT, right? So even at shows now, all of a sudden, where we've heard like last year was all OT, is now all of a sudden a group of folks that really do truly want to learn and understand. And I think bringing in those vendors to help speak the language and help get them prepared is massively helpful.
What would you say overall is like the top 3 biggest challenges that OT customers face? And like, is that a way that we could partners could get into the end users or the OT customers a lot quicker?
Go ahead.
You go. No.
Yeah, so I think security is on all OT minds. So in my mind, we're finding that it's actually a subset of prospects that are very interested in meeting and talking and learning. So when you bring up security within these environments, I find that they're very open to communicating, because they know they have to start getting. If they haven't started, they know they have to start doing something. So there is a lot of education that we're doing today in the marketplace. And so they're very open, I guess, is, in what I'm finding, and for, all environments, because they're looking to learn. And, our piece is very much infrastructure. So a lot of times we're a starting point of how do you actually get access to the traffic so you can physically monitor it and be able to secure it.
If I think about from the customer point of view, security represents downtime. Downtime is the biggest risk to the business, right? So you've got safety and you've got stoppage in production. And stoppage in production, depending on the organization, could mean tens of millions of dollars in an hour, right? So it comes down to bottom line and loss of lives, right? If you're thinking about energy, production, stoppage could mean explosion, could mean death on the plant floor, could mean overall, big impact to region or town or city, right? So you got to think about it on a kind of a bigger scale. But I think those are probably 2 areas where I think about.
For me, it would be education. So for us, when we go and speak to a customer, they know they need to do something about OT security, for whether it's risk or compliance based. For us, educating them, guiding them on the journey. Most of them suffer from kind of paralysis by analysis. They have budget, but they don't want to spend it in the wrong place. So going in, showing them what they've got, where their risks are, prioritizing them and giving them a roadmap from where they are to where they need to be, gives them the confidence and the knowledge about what to do next.
Yeah, and I think regulation is driving some of that already, and it will continue to do that for the next few years. So I think a lot of end customers are willing to have that conversation. Regulation is driving it, and just mapping some of those challenges with what you've got, and obviously using your partner ecosystem to do that.
So you mentioned regulation is a big driver. What are the main regulations at the moment that partners need to look out for to start the conversation around OT?
I would say NIS2 is probably the prevalent one. We've got another partner here as well, that as well as Barry, but CAF was I would say the traditional one that the NCSC was enforcing. So NIS2 definitely, that's probably the one I would say concentrate on.
Yeah, that's very focused on CNI providers. But if you do a lot in maritime, for example, then you look at what the maritime body's pushing. So it really depends on your customer base and so look at what vertical they're operating in. So for us, we do, as you can imagine by the accent, up in Scotland, quite a lot of oil and gas. OG 86, which comes out from the health and safety exec, is a big thing for us. And then we also focus on ISO 62443, which is an ISO standard that kind of replaced the older Purdue model. So it really depends on the vertical and the challenges that they're facing and the regulatory bodies that are pushing change.
I agree.
Guys, yeah, thanks for that. So, sorry, jumped in the mic there. Just want to ask you guys where you sort of see OT going in the next 5 years and how you think that's going to affect us as IT professionals.
I think OT becomes more IT, right? So like you're going to see this convergence, you're going to see the transformation. It's happening, right? Connectivity is going to play a huge part in it, and our partners and vendors are going to play a huge part in that as well. So like I think they start to meld into one. There's two reasons. One is a lot of OT practitioners are now retiring out of the business, and you've got no replacement for those folks, right? So, and the second piece is information needs to come out in order for businesses to operate and function the way that they truly need to and to enhance their business. So I do think it drives into more of a blended approach, but I'm a year in, so maybe I'm not the right guy to ask.
No, I would agree. I think we're seeing it mature, but it matures very slow. So if you look at IT change, it's been much faster because of things like digital transformation. In the OT space, they are very risk averse, so everything happens much slower. The zero trust point, you're not going to get to zero trust in an OT environment in this lifetime. I don't think. Most of the OT solutions that we see are really kind of DMZs or zones that have the kind of perimeter style security. So very strong defenses on the perimeter, remote access, potentially data diodes, a much higher level of assurance for files and data going in, which is where OpSWAT come in. So actually the vendor representation that you've got today is probably the main points that are addressed. Most of them don't want to go into these high-tech, threat-focused black boxes. They really need to just get the basics in place. So I think we'll see it mature like we've seen in IT, but perhaps not as fast.
Yeah, I would say data going to the cloud, for example. So a lot of OT, and I could go oil and gas, probably a little bit more mature. Manufacturing, I would say, but certainly power, some of those guys are thinking about, we do need to send the data to the cloud. What are we going to do with the data? So I think even within the OT sort of verticals, there's, people are on different journeys or different parts of the journey.
Yeah, and I also think that, a lot of it's these deployments don't happen in 3 months. So, I know we have quite a few customers, oil, gas, manufacturing, where they're looking to do, 200 sites, 150 sites, 300 sites. And so what they're going to be doing over the next 5 years is installing it. So it truly is, you're finding that these implementations, can be over, a 2-year period. And so they need the partners to help, expedite that, help in the field. And so, I find that, we're in the space of, they're learning, they're starting to implement, but it also takes, a lot of time. So we're going to be seeing just a lot of implementation over the next 5 years, which is exciting for all of us.
Brilliant. I think that's it, everyone. So this has been Delve Live, OT, Rise of the Machines. It's been my absolute honour to host my panel of guests. So we've had Chris Byrie, CEO from Garland Technologies. We've got Jake Alasko, Global Vice President of Partnerships. We've had Ian McGowan, CEO and co-founder of Barrier Networks, and Harjit Hofi, Senior Solutions Engineer at OpSWAT. So I hope you've all enjoyed our panel. If you've enjoyed it, please follow and subscribe to our podcast. Lance made me throw that in, by the way. Please refer it to your friends and your colleagues, and please join us next time for our next technology topic.